She arrived on a Tuesday, a bride delivered by mistake. That's what they told everyone anyway. The story went like this. A mail order mix-up, a letter sent to the wrong ranch in the sprawling, unforgiving territory of Copper Ridge, Montana. A simple, embarrassing clerical error. The kind of thing folks whisper about at the general store. A sad little tale of a woman left stranded, surplus cargo with a wounded heart. The man she thought was her groom, my uncle Groveland Tate, looked at her like she was a bill he had no intention of paying. So she stayed, they said, because her pride was too tough to chew. She found work as his housekeeper, learning to sweep the floors of the Lazy T Ranch like she was sweeping away her own humiliation. A neat story, tidy, plausible, but some mistakes aren't mistakes at all. They're traps, and I had just walked right into the middle of one. It all started the summer of 1882. I was Fielder Hask, 24 years old and softer than a 50-cent steak. My hands had never known anything rougher than Boston paper. My eyes had never seen a mountain that wasn't made of brick and ambition. I stepped off that stagecoach clutching a leather satchel and a letter from my Uncle Tate, a man I hadn't seen in 15 years. The letter was short, brutal, and had changed my entire life. Come west, boy. Time you learned to be a man. So I came expecting calluses and hard work. I came expecting to learn about cattle and horses. I did not come expecting a conspiracy that would threaten to burn the whole valley to the ground. The Copper Ridge Depot was barely a suggestion of a building, a platform and a sign that looked like it had given up years ago. The man waiting for me was built like an old fence post, weathered, unmovable, and deeply rooted in the dirt. Groveland Tate. His handshake could have cracked walnuts, and his eyes sized me up in a single, dismissive glance. Well, I'll be, he grunted, his gaze sweeping over my pressed city suit. You're even greener than I expected. Come on, let's get you to the ranch before you wilt. The wagon ride was a 40-minute education in just how much my spine could ache. The land was beautiful and terrifying, stretching out in every direction, under a sky so big it made you feel like an ant. Beautiful country, I tried. Beauty don't pay the bills, Tate said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. This land will test every inch of you, boy. Strip you down to what you really are. He had no idea how right he was. The ranch house came into view, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide front porch. It was a place built for function, not for show. And as we pulled up, the screen door creaked open and she stepped out. Melrose Draven. She wasn't pretty in the way Boston ladies were pretty. She was handsome, striking, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes as sharp and unforgiving as a winter morning. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that said she had weathered storms I couldn't even imagine. She wiped flour-dusted hands on her apron, her gaze landing on me with the force of a physical blow. So this is the apprentice, she said. Her voice had a faint, unplaceable accent, and it was laced with something that sounded a lot like pity. Looks like he'd blow away in a stiff breeze. Melrose, meet my nephew Fielder, Tate said. Fielder, this is Miss Draven. She keeps the house running and the rest of us in line. I tipped my hat. Pleased to meet you, Miss Draven. She looked me up and down like she was evaluating livestock for slaughter. We'll see about that. You ever worked with your hands, boy? I clerked in a shipping office, I said, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. Clerking, she said the word like it was a disease. Well, that explains the soft look about you. Don't worry, a few weeks out here, you'll either toughen up or head back east with your tail between your legs. My money's on the tail. Tate just chuckled. Don't mind Melrose. She's got a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. But it wasn't her tongue that worried me. It was her eyes. They held secrets. And from the moment I met her, I had the strangest feeling that her secrets and my uncle's ranch were tangled up together in a way that could get a man killed. That first dinner was a masterclass in awkward silence. The stew was hearty, the bread was fresh, and the conversation was dead on arrival. I tried to make small talk. This stew is excellent, Miss Draven. I cook the meat until it's dead, she replied, not even looking at me. Later, Tate showed me to my room, a small space under the eaves. Get some rest, he advised. And don't let Melrose's sharp tongue bother you. She's had a hard road. What kind of hard road? I asked. Tate paused in the doorway, his face suddenly unreadable. That's her story to tell, not mine. But I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't just her story. It was the ranch's story, too. A story no one was telling. That night, I lay in my Spartan room, listening to the low murmur of their voices from the kitchen below. Tate and Melrose. They weren't just an employer and his housekeeper. They were allies, co-conspirators. But in what? The next 2 weeks were a blur of humiliation. My apprenticeship in becoming a man was mostly an apprenticeship in failure, with Melrose Draven providing a running, merciless commentary. I learned to saddle a horse, but only after the saddle slipped sideways and dumped me in the dirt. Well, Melrose observed dryly from the barn door, at least you found the ground fast enough. I learned to move hay bales, but only after I lost my balance and tumbled from the loft, landing in an undignified heap of straw and wounded pride. Graceful as a three-legged cat, she remarked. Maybe we should tie a rope around your waist so you don't break your fool neck. I learned about cattle branding, but only after a calf stepped on my boot, prompting a yelp that spooked 3 other animals. You're wrestling with them like they're your mortal enemy, she called out from the fence. Calm down, hold firm, it'll be over before you know it. Fight them and you'll be out here until Christmas. Through it all, I watched her. I watched them both. There was a tension in the house that had nothing to do with my clumsiness. Tate was always watching the road, always checking the horizon. Melrose moved with a coiled energy, as if she was constantly waiting for a threat to appear. This wasn't a peaceful ranch. It was a fortress. But what were they defending against? The most legendary of my failures occurred on a Friday. It would forever be known as the Great Milking Disaster. Tate decided I needed to learn to milk Bessie, their most patient Holstein. Firm grip, steady rhythm, he explained. Simple enough. It should have been. But in my nervousness, I settled my stool next to the wrong animal. In the dim light of the barn, I hadn't noticed that the young bull, Hercules, had wandered into the stall. The next few seconds were chaos. The bull let out an indignant snort. I went flying backwards off the stool, and the commotion brought Melrose running from the house. She arrived just in time to see me picking myself up from the barn floor. She took one look at me, one look at the bull, and she burst into laughter. A real, deep, unrestrained laugh. Sweet Jesus, she gasped, leaning against the barn wall for support. Did you just try to milk Hercules? You just tried to milk a bull. Even Tate was laughing. Boy, I said milk the cow, not wrestle with the livestock. The teasing was relentless for days. Pass the Butterfielder, assuming you can tell the difference between butter and a bull. But something shifted after that. Her jokes seemed to carry less malice. And one afternoon, while she was showing me the right way to milk Bessie, she said something strange. The trick is to relax, she explained. The animal can tell if you're nervous. And for the love of all that's holy, make sure you're actually working with a cow this time. I'm never going to live that down, am I? I asked. Not in this lifetime, she confirmed. Then her smile faded just a little. But you kept getting up. Every time you fell, you got up and tried again. That counts for something. She looked me dead in the eye. Out here, staying on your feet is half the battle. It felt like a warning. The first real clue fell into my lap by accident. I was in Tate's study, looking for a ledger he'd asked me to fetch. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and tobacco. As I pulled a dusty book from the shelf, a small, folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. It was torn, just a fragment of a letter. The handwriting was flowery, feminine. It spoke of a long journey, of hope for a new life, and of a promise made. But it was the last visible sentence that made the hair on my arm stand up. And I do hope you find me a suitable wife, as you described in your correspondence. I am plain but hard-working, and will make a good partner for a man of the West. My blood ran cold. A suitable wife, as you described in your correspondence. This wasn't a letter from a bride. It was a letter to the person who arranged for the bride. The story was that Melrose had arrived by mistake, that the letter had been sent to the wrong ranch. But this fragment suggested something else entirely. It suggested that someone at the Lazy T Ranch had, in fact, been looking for a mail-order bride. Why would Tate lie? Why would Melrose go along with it? Unless the lie was the whole point. The next evening, I found a reason to be in town. Copper Ridge wasn't much more than a single dusty street lined with wooden storefronts. In Henderson's general store, I lingered by the horseshoe nails listening. It's a universal truth. If you want to know a town's secrets, listen to its women. Two of them, Mrs. Putnam and Mrs. Wheeler, the town's unofficial historians of gossip, were discussing the arrival of a traveling photographer. Did you see her reaction when those photography fellows mentioned they'd come from Billings? Mrs. Putnam whispered. Went white as fresh cotton, Mrs. Wheeler replied with relish. Guess it brought back memories of that whole mail-order bride business. 4 years ago now, wasn't it? My hand stilled. Poor girl, Mrs. Putnam continued, traveled all that way from Kansas, thinking she was going to marry Joseph Drummond out at the Circle D. Only the letter got mixed up somehow. Wrong directions, wrong ranch, wrong everything. Joseph Drummond, the Circle D. These were new pieces. Can you imagine? Mrs. Wheeler savored the drama. Standing on that doorstep, all dressed up for her wedding, and the man tells her he never sent for any bride. Joseph was decent about it, offered to put her up, but her pride was too wounded. Instead, she stayed right here and found work with old Tate. Made the best of a bad situation, I'll give her that. But you know how people talk. Mrs. Putnam lowered her voice. The bride nobody wanted. That's what they called her. I paid for my supplies in a daze. The story they told matched the official version. A mix-up, an embarrassment. But it didn't match the fragment of the letter I'd found, the letter that spoke of an arrangement. The whole story was a carefully constructed lie, repeated so often it had become the truth. But why? What really happened 4 years ago? That night, the tension in the ranch house felt thick enough to cut with a knife. I watched Melrose as she served dinner, trying to see past the sharp-witted woman to the girl who had been left on a stranger's doorstep. Later, after Tate had gone to bed, I found her washing dishes in the kitchen. I picked up a dish rag and started drying, the silence stretching between us. I heard something in town today, I said carefully. Her hands stilled for a second in the soapy water. Did you now? About you. About why you came to Copper Ridge. She resumed washing, her movements sharp and angry. And I'm sorry, I said. That must have been difficult. Difficult? She turned to face me, soap suds dripping from her hands. That's one word for it. Humiliating would be another. Devastating might be more accurate. But difficult works. I can't believe any man would... Would what? She cut me off, her voice dangerously steady. Turn away a woman who showed up on his doorstep unannounced and unwanted? Joseph Drummond was a gentleman about it. The mistake wasn't his fault. Was it a mistake, Melrose? The question hung in the air. She set down a plate with a clatter. What are you asking me, Fielder? I took a breath. I found part of a letter. In your uncle's study. It sounded like someone was making arrangements for a bride. The color drained from her face. For a long moment she just stared at me, her sharp eyes searching my face. I expected her to deny it, to get angry, to call me a snooping fool. Instead, a strange, grim smile touched her lips. You're smarter than you look, city boy. She dried her hands slowly, deliberately. The mistake wasn't the letter being sent. The mistake was who it was delivered to. I don't understand. No, she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. You don't. You came here thinking you were just learning to be a cowboy. You think this is just a ranch. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with an intensity that chilled me to the bone. Some mistakes aren't mistakes, Fielder. They're traps, and this ranch is full of them. You need to decide if you're going to be bait or if you're going to be the one holding the gun. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone in the flickering lamplight, the dish rag still in my hand. The whole world had just tilted on its axis. The lie was real, but it was deeper and darker than I ever could have imagined. Melrose wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was a survivor of something deliberate, something that was still happening. and I was standing right in the middle of it. The third week of August, everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the barn with Benton Merck, the foreman, when we heard Melrose's voice from the house. It wasn't a call, it was a scream. We found her in the kitchen, kneeling beside Tate. He had collapsed, his face a ghastly gray, his hand clutching his chest. It came on sudden, Melrose said, her usual composure shattered. He was reaching for his coffee and just dropped. In that moment, the city clerk in me died for good. Benton, ride to town and fetch Doc Morrison, I heard myself say, the authority in my voice surprising even me. Tell him it looks like Tate's heart. Melrose, help me get him to his bed. We got him settled, his breathing shallow and ragged. I'm not dying today, he wheezed, managing a weak, grim smile. Too much paperwork left undone. Doc Morrison arrived within the hour, a grizzled man who looked like he'd seen it all. After a long examination, he came out of Tate's room, his expression grave. His heart's been working too hard for too long, he told us. He needs complete rest for at least 6 weeks. No stress, no excitement, and absolutely no ranch work. If he tries, he'll be dead. 6 weeks. The cattle drive to Billings was next month. The bank payment was due in October. The ranch was on a knife's edge. After the doctor left, Melrose sank into a kitchen chair. Well, she said, her voice hollow, I suppose this is where you pack your bags and head back to Boston. Can't say I blame you. Why would I do that? She gave me a look that questioned my sanity. Because you're not ready to run a ranch, city boy. This isn't about learning to milk cows anymore. This is about payrolls and cattle prices and men who will test every decision you make. I walked to the window, looking out at the land that was slowly becoming a part of me. You're right. I'm not ready. But Tate needs this place to survive, so we'll learn together. We? Her eyebrows shot up. Since I stopped being just Tate's nephew, I said, turning to face her, and started being someone who belongs here. A flicker of something, respect maybe, crossed her face. But it was gone in an instant. The crisis had put up walls between us that were even higher than before. She was closed off, focused, a soldier preparing for a siege. That afternoon, while Melrose was tending to Tate, I went back into his study. I told myself I was looking for bank papers, for contacts, for anything that would help me manage the ranch. But that was a lie. I was looking for the rest of that letter. I searched for an hour, my hands growing dusty, my heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and dread. I found it tucked inside an old book on animal husbandry. It was the other half of the torn page, and it changed everything. Again. The handwriting wasn't Tate's. I'd seen his writing on the letter he sent me. It was a rough, almost angry scrawl. This was a neat, precise hand. Educated. And the letter wasn't addressed to the Lazy T Ranch. It was addressed to Mr. Joseph Drummond, Circle D Ranch, Copper Ridge, Montana. Melrose had been telling the truth. The letter was meant for Drummond, but the address had been crossed out and in a different, cruder ink. Someone had written, Care of Groveland Tate, Lazy T Ranch. The letter hadn't been misdelivered by the post office. It had been intercepted, redirected. It was sabotage. Someone had deliberately engineered Melrose's arrival at the wrong ranch, knowing it would cause chaos, shame, and distraction. But who? And why? My mind raced. Tate's sudden illness. Happening right now, when the ranch was at its most vulnerable. Was it really a heart attack? Or was it just another piece of the puzzle? Another move in a game I didn't understand? I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't just about a business dispute. This was about destroying my uncle piece by piece. The next morning, the first real test arrived. Jake Morrison, the lead wrangler, found me by the corral. We got trouble, he said, his face grim. North pasture fence. Looks like someone cut the wire. Cattle are scattered from here to Sunday. Rustlers? It was possible, but it felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. Gather the men, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my gut. We'll ride out. And Jake, bring rifles. Melrose was on the porch as we mounted up. She didn't say anything, just handed me a rifle. This belonged to Tate's father, she said, her voice flat. It's killed more than its share of trouble. The ride out confirmed my fears. 200 yards of fence wire had been deliberately cut. 30 head of cattle were gone. It wasn't rustling for profit, it was a message. Benton Rourke, the foreman, examined the severed wire. This is Latham Crow's work, sure as shooting. He's been claiming that creek bed belongs to him since spring. Any proof? I asked. Boot prints heading toward his property. Same distinctive heel mark we've seen before. The old fielder would have ridden to town for the sheriff, but Melrose's words echoed in my head. Decide if you're going to be bait or if you're going to be the one holding the gun. Jake, take half the men and round up the strays, I ordered. Benton, you and the others, come with me. We're going to pay Mr. Crow a visit. Latham Crow's homestead was a ramshackle cabin that looked like it was losing a war with gravity. He emerged as we rode up, a tall, lean man with a sneer permanently etched on his face. Well, well, he drawled. If it ain't the Boston boy playing rancher, where's old Tate hiding? Mr. Crow, I said, dismounting, we have 30 head of cattle missing and a cut fence. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Can't say I would, he spat. Cattle wander. Fences break. Fences don't cut themselves, I said, my hand resting near the butt of my pistol. His eyes narrowed. You accusing me of something, boy? That word, boy, it was meant to make me small, to make me back down. I'm saying 30 head of lazy tea cattle are on your land, and I want them back, now. And if I say no? A month ago, I would have crumbled, but now I felt a cold, hard anger solidifying in my gut. An anger on behalf of Tate, lying helpless in his bed. An anger for Melrose, whose life had been tampered with. Then I ride to town and file a complaint with Sheriff Martinez. He investigates, finds the cattle, and discovers you've been stealing from your neighbors. You lose the cattle, you face criminal charges, and you probably lose this scrap of land too. I paused. Or you return the cattle now, pay for the fence, and we forget this ever happened. He stared at me, his face a mask of fury. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then his shoulders sagged just a little. 30 head, you said. 30 head plus $50 for repairs and lost time. 25. 40. Final offer. Done, he spat. But this don't make us friends, Boston boy. Wouldn't dream of it, I replied. We got the cattle back. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. Crow was a piece of the puzzle, but he wasn't the whole thing. He was a blunt instrument. Someone else was the brains. Someone else had redirected that letter. That evening, I was going over the ranch ledgers, my head swimming with numbers and unanswered questions. Melrose brought me a cup of coffee. She hadn't spoken to me all day, her silence a heavy weight in the house. She stood by the table watching me. Heard you face down Latham Crow today. News travels fast. Jake says you stared him down like a seasoned gunfighter. I was terrified the whole time, and I admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Cowboy, she said, her voice softening for the first time since Tate's collapse. It's being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. She was about to turn away when I stopped her. Melrose, I found the rest of the letter. She froze. It was meant for Joseph Drummond, I said quietly. Someone crossed out his address and wrote in Tate's. She turned back slowly, her face pale in the lamplight. She wasn't surprised. She was resigned, as if she'd been waiting for me to figure it out. Who, Melrose? Who would do that? She looked toward the window, out into the vast darkness that surrounded the ranch house. The list of men who want to see your uncle ruined isn't short, Fielder. He's built this ranch from nothing. He's tough, but he's fair, and some people resent that. They see his success as their failure. Like Crow? Crow is a symptom, not the disease, she said. He's just a coyote, nipping at the edges. You need to be looking for the wolf. Where do I look? She met my gaze, her eyes dark with a weariness that went bone deep. Crow was right about one thing. You should be looking closer to home. Closer to home. The words echoed in my head for days. I watched the ranch hands, men who had worked for my uncle for years. Was one of them the wolf? Benton Rourke, the foreman? He was loyal, capable. But I'd seen the flicker of resentment in his eyes when Tate praised my small successes. He had worked his whole life on this land, only to see the owner's soft-handed nephew positioned to take over. Jake Morrison, the wrangler? He was a gossip, friendly enough, but always seemed to know more than he let on. Even Charlie Webb, the quiet hand who barely spoke 2 words a day, came under my suspicion. The quiet ones are always the ones you have to watch. I felt like I was losing my mind, seeing shadows and conspiracies everywhere. The ranch, which had started to feel like a home, now felt like a cage full of snakes. And then Crow made his next move. It wasn't cattle this time, it was water. The creek that ran through the north pasture, the primary water source for half our herd, was suddenly choked with debris. A fallen tree strategically placed had created a dam, diverting the flow onto Crow's property. It was an act of war, but it was also a mistake. Crow got sloppy. In his haste, he left something behind. I found it caught on a branch near the downed tree. A small silver button, ornate and unusual. Not the kind of thing a dirt-poor homesteader like Latham Crow would own, but I had seen a button just like it before. On the vest Benton Rourke wore to town on Saturdays. My blood turned to ice. Benton, the loyal foreman, the man who had been here for 10 years. It seemed impossible, but the evidence was right there, in the palm of my hand. I knew I couldn't just confront him. He was respected by the other men. It would be my word, the Greenhorn nephew's word, against his. I needed more. I needed proof. So I set a trap. That evening, I made a show of talking with Melrose on the porch, making sure several of the hands were within earshot. I spoke loudly about how Tate was doing better, how Doc Morrison said he was on the mend and had been asking to see the account books. I said that Tate had signed papers that morning, giving me full power of attorney to manage the ranch's finances until he was back on his feet. It was all a lie. Tate was still weak, and he hadn't signed a thing. But I was counting on the lie to smoke out the wolf. I spent the next day watching Benton. He did his work as usual, his face an unreadable mask. But there was a new tension in his shoulders. He was jumpy, his eyes constantly darting towards the main house. That night, after everyone had turned in, I waited. I sat in the darkened kitchen, the silver button cold in my pocket, and watched the bunkhouse. Around midnight, a figure slipped out. It was Benton. He didn't head for the outhouse. He moved silently toward the road that led to town, keeping to the shadows. I followed. He led me on a half-mile trek through the cold Montana night. He wasn't heading for Crow's homestead. He was heading for a small, isolated line shack on the edge of our property. A light glowed in its single window. I crept closer, my heart pounding against my ribs. Through the grimy window, I could see 2 figures inside, their faces illuminated by a flickering lantern. Benton and Latham Crow. My gut twisted. It was true. But they weren't alone. A third man sat with them at the crude wooden table. A man I recognized from my trip to town. A man who held the fate of the Lazy T in his well-manicured hands. Banker Harrison Caldwell. The scope of the conspiracy hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a property line dispute or a foreman's jealousy. This was a systematic plan to destroy my uncle, orchestrated by the most powerful man in town. Crow provided the muscle, harassing the ranch and devaluing the property. Benton, the inside man, provided the information. When to strike, where the vulnerabilities were, how to hurt Tate the most. And Caldwell, the banker, was waiting to pull the financial trigger. He would deny Tate the loans he needed to recover, foreclose on the property, and then buy the entire ranch at auction for pennies on the dollar. They would split it 3 ways. 3 vipers circling my uncle's life's work. And the mail-order bride. What was that about? I strained to hear their conversation. The old man's getting better, you said? It was Crow's voice, rough and anxious. That's what the city boy claims, Benton sneered, and he says Tate signed papers, gave the kid control of the money. Caldwell sighed, a sound of pure reptilian frustration. This is becoming complicated. The plan was simple. Harass him, break his spirit, let his heart condition finish the job. Then the nephew would be so overwhelmed he'd sell for our first offer. The kid's tougher than he looks, Benton admitted, and that Draven woman is always watching. Caldwell made a dismissive gesture. The woman was your idea, Benton. A brilliant one, I admit. A little public humiliation to soften him up. A scandal at his doorstep. It was supposed to throw him off balance. It would have worked, Benton grumbled, but the old fool took her in instead of sending her packing. And she stayed. Never figured on that. So that was it. Melrose wasn't the target. She was the weapon. A tool to be used against my uncle. To shame him. To weaken his standing in the community. She was just bait. The cold anger I'd felt before was nothing compared to the rage that now consumed me. They hadn't just tried to steal land and money. They had tried to destroy a woman's life as a casual opening move in their sick game. I had to get out of there. I had to get back to the ranch, to tell Melrose, to figure out what to do. I started to back away, moving as silently as I could, but my boots snagged on a loose root. A dry branch snapped with a crack that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the still night air. Inside the cabin, the voices stopped. The lantern was extinguished. Silence. Then the cabin door flew open. "Who's out there?" Benton's voice roared into the darkness. I ran. I scrambled through the brush, branches tearing at my clothes, my lungs burning. Behind me, I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth, cursing. They knew I had heard them. They knew I knew everything. This was no longer about a ranch. This was about my life. I burst into the clearing near our barn, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought I had made it, but a figure stepped out from the shadow of the barn, blocking my path. It was Benton. He must have known a shortcut. He held a pitchfork in his hands, its tines glinting in the moonlight. "Going somewhere, city boy?" he sneered, advancing on me slowly. "It was you," I panted, backing away. "You redirected the letter. You planned the whole thing." "Smart boy," he said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Took you long enough. Tate was weak. He never would have sold. He loved this dirt more than anything, so we decided to take it. And Melrose," he laughed, a low, ugly sound. "She was just bait, a way to cause a little trouble, a pretty little accident to get things started. Too bad for her, the wrong man opened the door. And too bad for you that you had to stick your nose where it didn't belong." He lunged, the pitchfork aimed straight at my chest. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, falling hard to the ground. There was nowhere to go. This was it. I was going to die in the dirt, just another part of their ugly secret. Benton loomed over me, raising the pitchfork for the final, killing blow. And then a shot rang out. The sound cracked through the night, echoing off the mountains. Benton's eyes went wide with shock. A dark stain blossomed on the front of his shirt. The pitchfork clattered from his grasp. He staggered for a moment, a look of pure disbelief on his face, and then he collapsed to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing, my mind reeling. I looked toward the source of the shot. A figure stood in the dark doorway of the barn. The moonlight caught the long, deadly gleam of a rifle barrel. It was Melrose. Her face was a pale, grim mask in the darkness. The rifle was steady in her hands, held with a familiarity that was terrifying. "No one," she said, her voice as cold and hard as Riverstone, "calls me bait." She walked slowly out of the barn, the rifle still pointed at Benton's unmoving form. She didn't even glance at me. Her eyes were fixed on the man she had just shot. "Is he—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "He's alive," she said, her voice flat. I aimed for his shoulder. A dead man can't answer questions. My mind was a chaotic storm of confusion and shock. "Melrose, you knew? You knew it was him?" She finally looked at me, and in her eyes I saw 4 years of suspicion, 4 years of quiet, burning anger. "I never believed the mistake story," she said, her voice low and intense. "A letter doesn't just get redirected like that. Not out here. Someone paid the stagecoach driver. Someone with a reason to want me at the Lazy T instead of the Circle D. I didn't know who. I didn't know why. But I knew it was deliberate." She took a breath, the story pouring out of her now. "So I stayed. It wasn't about pride, Fielder. It was about finding out who tried to ruin my life and making them pay. I've been watching everyone on this ranch for 4 years. I've listened to every conversation, watched every sidelong glance. I started suspecting Benton 6 months ago. He had a little too much money for a foreman, made a few too many trips to town for no good reason. He was meeting with Crow. I knew it. I just couldn't prove it. Everything started to click into place. Her sharpness wasn't just a defense. It was a shield to keep people from getting too close, from discovering her secret mission. Her constant watchfulness wasn't paranoia. It was surveillance. She hadn't just been housekeeping. She'd been investigating. But Caldwell, the banker, I stammered. He was with them. Her face hardened. That is new information. It's bigger than I thought. Suddenly, a new, more terrifying thought struck me. Tate's heart attack, I whispered. Was it? Melrose's eyes went dark. Doc Morrison, she said, the name like a curse on her lips. He's always been too friendly with Caldwell. They're brothers-in-law, you know. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening force. The redirected letter, the harassment from Crow, the betrayal by Benton, the financial pressure from Caldwell, and the convenient, timely heart attack administered by a family member of the conspiracy. It wasn't a heart attack. It was attempted murder. A slow-acting poison, maybe. Something to make it look natural. Something to remove the final obstacle. My God, I breathed. The whole town. Not the whole town, she corrected me, her voice grim. Just the part with all the power. She looked from Benton's groaning form on the ground to the dark road where Crow and Caldwell had vanished. We can't go to the sheriff. He's Caldwell's cousin. She met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw the true weight of the burden she had been carrying alone for 4 long years. We're on our own, Fielder, she said, and they know that we know. The next few hours were a blur. We dragged Benton into an empty storage cellar beneath the kitchen, tied him up, and patched his bleeding shoulder as best we could. He was delirious with pain, muttering about money and land and the city boy who ruined everything. He had confessed, but his confession was useless without a lawman who would listen. We were trapped. The ranch was an island, and the sea was full of sharks who now knew we were bleeding. Caldwell, Crow, and Doc Morrison knew their plan was exposed. They wouldn't just give up. They would come for us. They'll come to silence us, I said, pacing the length of the kitchen. They'll make it look like an accident, a robbery gone wrong. No witnesses. Melrose was cleaning the rifle, her movements precise and economical. Then we can't wait for them to come to us. We have to hit them first. We need proof. Something undeniable. Benton's confession is our word against theirs, she finished. Caldwell owns half this town. He'll paint us as hysterical liars or worse. We need paper. We need ledgers. We need the proof from Caldwell's own bank. It was a suicide mission, breaking into the bank in a town where the sheriff was part of the conspiracy. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. We both froze, grabbing for our weapons. A figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, hard fire. It was Tate. Took you too long enough to figure it out, he rasped, his voice weak but clear. Melrose rushed to his side. You should be in bed. You're not well enough. I'm not dying yet, he grunted, waving her off. He shuffled over to the kitchen table and sank into a chair. Doc Morrison's medicine. It made me feel worse, not better. Foggy, weak. I suspected something was off a week ago. Poured the damn stuff down the sink. Been pretending to be sicker than I am. Listening. He looked from me to Melrose, a flicker of fierce pride in his tired eyes. Heard the whole thing. The shot. Benton in the cellar. Good work, both of you. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. We weren't alone. The old wolf was still in the fight. They tried to poison you, I said. They did, Tate agreed. And for that, there's a special kind of reckoning. Now what's the plan? We told him our idea. The bank, the ledgers. He shook his head. Too risky, he said. Caldwell's not a fool. He'll have those books under lock and key. We need to make him come to us. We need to set a new trap. A bigger one. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Caldwell is greedy. That's his weakness. Greed makes a man stupid. We're going to use it against him. The plan he laid out was audacious, dangerous, and brilliant. It started with a rumor. Jake Morrison, the wrangler whom we now trusted, was sent into town with a story. He was to get drunk at the saloon and let it slip that the lazy tea was done for. That with Tate sick and the ranch under attack, Fielder Haskey, the city boy, had lost his nerve. He was selling the ranch cheap to an out-of-town buyer, a mining concern from Denver. The deal was happening tomorrow night at the ranch, and it was being paid for in cash. A lot of cash. It was the perfect bait. The thought of all that cash, of their prize slipping away to an outsider, would be more than Caldwell's greed could resist. He wouldn't be able to stop himself. He and his cronies would come to the ranch to take the money, to eliminate us, and to reclaim their prize. And we would be waiting, but we wouldn't be alone. 20 years ago, Tate explained, I helped out a young U.S. Marshal. Got him out of a bad spot with some rustlers. He owes me a favor. He's based out of Helena now. I sent a rider for him the day after I stopped taking Morrison's poison. My jaw dropped. He had been one step ahead of them the entire time. He should be arriving in Copper Ridge tomorrow, Tate finished. He's going to be our surprise guest. The next 36 hours were the longest of my life. We worked, we waited, and we prepared. Every loyal hand on the lazy tea was brought into the plan. They were good men, and their fury at Benton's betrayal was cold and absolute. They cleaned rifles, checked ammunition, and chose their positions. The ranch house was no longer a home. It was a fortress waiting for a siege. The night of the trap was still and cold. A sliver of moon hung in the inky sky, offering just enough light to see by. We had a single lantern lit in the main room, making it look like we were inside, waiting for our buyer. But we were all outside, hidden in the shadows of the barn, the bunkhouse, the corral, rifles ready. U.S. Marshal Thompson had arrived that afternoon, a tall, quiet man with eyes that missed nothing. He was with us, hidden in the deepest shadow of the porch. Around 11 we heard them, the soft thud of horses' hooves approaching on the dirt road. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, Caldwell, Crow, and Doc Morrison, looking pale and terrified, clearly dragged into something he had no stomach for. They dismounted, moving with a predatory silence, and crept toward the house. Crow held a shotgun. Caldwell had a pistol in his hand. They were here for blood. They kicked open the door and stormed into the empty, lantern-lit room. For a moment there was confused silence. "It's a trap!" Caldwell's voice shrieked. "Drop your weapons!" Marshal Thompson's voice boomed from the porch, a sound of absolute authority. Suddenly the night erupted. "Drop 'em!" Tate roared from the barn. Lights flared to life all around the house as our ranch hands revealed themselves, a dozen rifles all aimed at the 3 men silhouetted in the doorway. They were surrounded, outgunned, trapped. Crow, ever the fool, tried to raise his shotgun. A shot cracked from my right. It wasn't my rifle. It was Melrose's. The shotgun flew from Crow's hands as he howled in pain, clutching a shattered wrist. Caldwell dropped his pistol as if it were on fire. Doc Morrison raised his hands so high they were trembling. It was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Marshal Thompson's authority backing us, the conspiracy unraveled. Benton, singing like a canary from the cellar to save his own skin, gave them everything. The redirected letter, the poison medicine, the plan to steal the ranch. The marshal's investigation of the bank's ledgers revealed years of fraud committed by Caldwell, ruining dozens of other families, not just ours. The entire rotten core of Copper Ridge was ripped out into the light. Caldwell, Crow, Benton, and a weeping Doc Morrison were taken away in irons. Their reign of greed and terror finished for good. Justice had come to Copper Ridge. In the quiet days that followed, the ranch felt different. The air was lighter. The shadows were gone. It was finally just a home. Tate, recovering his strength now, officially made me his partner. But he and I both knew who the real hero was. One evening, I found Melrose on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "It's really over," I said, standing beside her. "It is," she said, a small, genuine smile on her face, a smile I was finally seeing more and more often. "That story everyone told," I said. "The bride nobody wanted." She looked at me, her eyes clear and bright. "They got it wrong. I wasn't the bride nobody wanted. I was the bride who arrived at exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, even if it was for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't a mistake, I said, taking her hand. It was fate. She laughed, a real beautiful sound that echoed in the quiet evening. Fate? Or just a very stubborn woman with a rifle? Both, I said. Definitely both. A year later, we were married in the little white church at the edge of town. This time the whispers were of respect, not pity. Tate stood beside me looking healthier than I'd ever seen him. Melrose, radiant and fierce, didn't pause for a second when the Reverend asked her to take me as her husband. We built a life on that land, forged not in a gentle romance, but in the fire of conspiracy and the fight for survival. We faced down harsh winters, cattle diseases, and falling prices, but none of it seemed so hard after what we'd already been through together. 2 years after the villains were sent to prison, our daughter Adeline was born, with my stubborn chin and her mother's fierce spirit. Sometimes late at night, I'll look at Melrose sleeping beside me, and I'll think about the impossible chain of events that brought us here. A lie, a redirected letter, a plot born of greed. They meant to use her as bait to destroy a good man. Instead, they delivered a warrior who saved us all. The package that arrived on the wrong doorstep wasn't a mistake. It was a reckoning. And sometimes a reckoning is the most beautiful love story of all. What do you think? Was it fate that brought Melrose to the lazy tea, or was it a justice she had to claim for herself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of a mistake that turned into a fight for survival, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of when things aren't quite what they seem. Thanks for watching.